Someone left a pair of glasses up here, one of the presenters this morning. Oh, okay. They fell in my bag. They're mine now. Okay. Friends, the assembly will now come to order. Goftawi no naskumtanan. Kakioma, Isino Kamiak. Kakiomi Namichit. Nawakumanak. Kamiak. Thank you, Creator of heaven and earth, for all the relatives you have given us on this earth. Those who walk, those who fly, those who crawl, and those who swim, and all of us. We give you thanks for this time we have together. Bless our time and our work in Jesus' name. Amen. The court of our church is now in session. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, oh Lord, we ask your blessing. We're moving to the business committee. John Barrett is coming to present.
Thank you, moderator. As we had informed you at the commencement of General Assembly, the Business Committee has assumed responsibility for the roll to leave and withdraw. I remind commissioners that should you have good cause to miss a Sederunt or leave Assembly before our final adjournment, you are to notify the Business Committee. In that regard, I have an interim report on roll to leave and withdraw. The Reverend Bill Dean, Presbytery of Prince Edward Island, will be absent from Sederunts 7, 8, and 9. Lori Kim Den Otter from the Presbytery of Kingston will be absent from Sederunt 5. We have also been informed that Daniel Kim from the Presbytery of Western Hanka is to be removed from the roll. I'd like to give you another reminder as well that should you wish to make an amendment to any of the recommendations that we'll be following, that you are to submit those in advance, ideally to the Business Committee, so that they can be posted on PC Biz. So you can either do it yourself through your laptop under the Submit Motions tab in PC Biz, or deliver a handwritten copy to Doug here at the Business Committee table. Thank you, moderator.
So the Life and Mission Agency Committee report is introduced by the convener, Donna McCobine.
Yes, I'm not very tall. Good afternoon, moderator. I'm here as convener of the Life and Mission Agency Committee, and so I will be presenting the report. The report you have before you under the committee section of PC Biz, you'll find it. And it contains much information on many of the programs and related work, which has been entrusted to the committee by the General Assembly. And the areas of focus include justice, discernment for ministry, worship, stewardship, communication, support of new, renewing, and sustaining ministries, ministries with Indigenous peoples, working together with international church partners, and development and relief, and other matters that the church assigns to the LMA. In its work, the committee seeks to be always faithful to the mission and vision of the Presbyterian Church in Canada as it serves within the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Moderator, contained in this year's report is information on program support, Canadian ministries, communication, international ministries, justice ministries, ministry and church vocations, Presbyterian World Service and Development, stewardship, and planned giving. And within the report, there are recommendations. There are many recommendations, but they pertain to different aspects of the agency's work. But beyond those recommendations, there is a great deal of valuable information that, when used, can help equip church leaders. So I would encourage all the commissioners, guests, visitors, everybody else to explore the whole report. The report and recommendations are before the court moderator, and all the recommendations of the Life and Mission Agency Committee will be moved by Teresa McDonald Lee of the Presbytery of Huron, Perth, who is to my left, and seconded by Nicole Reed of the Presbytery of Niagara, who is also present in the court. Moderator, there are consent recommendations, and we ask that recommendation number 6 be pulled from the consent recommendation as a committee. That was just an oversight on our part. So the consent recommendations that are before the General Assembly are 7, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. Moved and seconded. Yes, moderator?
If any commissioner wishes to discuss a recommendation in the consent list, now is the time to seek that recognition and ask that it be removed. Number 3.
Thank you, moderator. Chris Clark, Presbytery of Ottawa, number 14, please.
Any other comments, discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that motion is carried. We'll now consider the revised consent recommendation.
Just the recommendation. So we have the remaining recommendations, moderator. But
On the screen.
are they on the screen? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we're okay. So you have the consent and you have the remaining recommendations. But before we turn to those recommendations, moderator, before we consider them, we would like to present the work of Presbyterian World Service and Development. So I would welcome the convener, Teresa McDonald Lee, at this time to address the court.
Thank you, moderator. The ministry of Presbyterian World Service and Development is rooted in the living hope of Jesus Christ and inspired by God's promise of abundant life. For 75 years now, PWS&D has been a vital part of how the Presbyterian Church in Canada follows the call to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. I'm glad for the chance to share this vital work with the Assembly today on behalf of the PWS&D Committee, our partners around the world who do the work on the ground, and on behalf of those whose lives have been changed through your generosity. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge current PWS&D committee members in the court today, Kello from Alberta, Donna from Saskatchewan, and Laura from Manitoba. In 2022, the church commemorated 75 years of work in humanitarian assistance, sustainable development, and refugee sponsorship through PWS&D. We recently closed this time with a service of Thanksgiving that you can still watch online on YouTube. Last year, PWS&D contributed $8.2 million worth of development and relief programs where most needed around the world. I don't want to pass over that number too quickly. $8.2 million worth of development work. We, all of us, you and I, even in the midst of change and uncertainty, contributed over $8 million worth of disaster relief and development programs. This money comes from different sources and places in different ways. Most significantly, $3.7 million was given to PWS&D in direct donations from members of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Close to $500,000 of that was contributed by legacy funds and gifts of securities to the Loaves and Fishes Fund. The response to Ukraine was substantial, with over $900,000 raised. These funds have been put to work with Hungarian Interchurch Aid in the ACT Alliance, with the Canadian Food Grains Bank, and with a local partner. We were very pleased to see that the funds donated for the Ukraine relief did not take away from the resources needed to respond to other situations in the world, many of which do not receive the same level of media attention. Another source of funding is through the growing projects of the Canadian Food Grains Bank. From Prince Edward Island to Alberta, Presbyterian growing projects contributed over $400,000 to PWS&D's account at CFGB. Rural congregations make this possible, doing what they do best to feed the world. And our membership in the Canadian Food Grains Bank is the key to the story of how PWS&D is able to leverage our donations and help them to multiply. For the last 30 years, we've been able to work with other churches and with the Canadian government to address critical food needs in the world. Last year, PWS&D led a large humanitarian response to the floods in Pakistan, which was also supported by many other churches at the Canadian Food Grains Bank. With $600,000 donated by Presbyterians, we led and continue to lead a multi-million-dollar response, providing essential food items to thousands of families affected in Pakistan. Unfortunately, there is one place in the world where we are not able to help right now, and that is Afghanistan. Canada's sanctions on the Taliban have prevented us from being able to provide much-needed humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. That country has now gone through 2 winters since the Taliban has taken hold of the country, and the level of suffering is reaching critical levels. There is some progress on this issue with a bill before the Canadian government right now, but it will require more advocacy to expedite that bill through the Parliament. And we ask for your assistance in this work. In 2022, PWS&D supported congregations from Nova Scotia to British Columbia in the sponsorship of refugees. 43 refugees originating from 8 countries arrived in Canada last year, and the hard work of congregations in this ministry of welcome is essential. It was heartening to see this assembly's embrace and passion for refugee sponsorship, and I would encourage you to speak to Guy or other PWS&D staff members about how your congregation can become involved in sponsoring a refugee. Finally, the PWS&D committee noted this year that this marked Guy's 25 years on PWS&D staff, with the last many years as the executive director, and he and his staff do an incredible job on all of our behalf. So congratulations, Guy. I hope that many of you received an email this morning from PWS&D, and if you didn't, please go and sign up for the newsletters so you know what is happening. An urgent appeal has just been put out by the Humanitarian Coalition to respond to the crisis in Sudan and in neighboring countries. Due to the conflict in Sudan and the Democratic Republic in Congo and extreme climate weather events happening in that region in the world, there is a response needed to provide much needed food. And the countries impacted are Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan, and Sudan. The government of Canada has offered to match these donations until the end of June, so know that every dollar that you give is multiplied. So please donate generously to this important appeal. We can never underestimate the reach of this agency of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, working together with so many churches and partners towards a more compassionate, sustainable, and just world. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you to the congregations and presbyteries who make the mission of PWS&D possible. Together, we are making a difference. And I'm pleased now to share with you a video that was put together for the 75th anniversary called Practical Compassion.
Each child of God is born in a place they did not choose. For some, it means access to an abundance of resources. For others, it means a lifetime of struggle to stay alive. For 75 years, the church has recognized the need to act so that all of God's children may live with dignity. God has provided us with a planet of abundance, with enough for all. We are called to build bridges of solidarity and to reach out where needed to share the blessings we have been given. Every year, Presbyterian World Service and Development responds to daily need as well as large and small disasters around the world. We respond because we are called by Christ to do so, based on need and regardless of faith, race, or gender. Through sustainable development projects, people have better health and food security, as well as sustainable livelihoods both now and for the future. In the face of stigma and injustice, PWS&D helps people and communities advocate for their rights. In times of disaster, access to food, water and sanitation, shelter, and emotional support is provided for people dealing with conflict and climate emergencies. With support from presbyteries, congregations, and individuals, refugees are sponsored and welcomed to Canada. The church's work in development, relief, and refugee sponsorship is a concrete way to provide hope where there is often only despair. From despair to hope, with the work of our partners, new sustainable futures emerge. Together, we will continue to foster peace and Christian unity through ecumenical collaborations, nationally and globally. The members and congregations of the Presbyterian Church in Canada are key to this ongoing story of practical compassion. Thank you for joining us in living out Jesus' call to love our neighbor as ourselves.
We move now to recommendation 1.
Correct. Moderator, recommendation 1 is concerning leading with care. The wording of the recommendation that to the new material proposed in the report above, that those words be added to leading with care, and that the minor edits to the original text be approved. So recommendation 1 is moved and seconded.
Are there any questions? The YARs and student reps, how do you vote? Yes? Any opposed? No. Commissioners, you have been advised. Commissioners, how do you vote? In favor? Those opposed? It is passed.
Moderator, recommendation number 2 also is concerning leading with care policy, that the Life and Mission Agency be given permission to make minor changes to the guidelines versus the policy statement of leading with care, a policy for ensuring a climate of safety in the Presbyterian Church in Canada for the sake of clarity and ease of reading, and to update the information in it to reflect changes approved by the General Assembly and changes in Canadian law. Recommendation number 2 is also moved and seconded.
Any questions? Advisory vote from the YARs and the student reps. All in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners, you've been advised. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We move to
Moderator,
recommendation,
Yeah, my apologies.
recommendation 3.
Recommendation number 3 is before you, that the above revised policy and procedures for addressing harassment in the church be approved. Recommendation 3 is moved and seconded.
Any questions? Yaris? Are you in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners, be advised. All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. We move to recommendation 4.
Moderator, recommendation 4 is with respect to guidelines for dealing with mental health issues. And the recommendation is that the above proposed revisions to the guidelines for dealing with mental health issues 2011 be adopted. Moved and
And-
seconded. Yeah.
Any questions? Okay, the young adults are YARS and student reps. Are you in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners, you've been advised. All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Recommendation 6 or 5.
Moderator, recommendation number 5 is that the Life and Mission Agency be given permission to make minor changes to the guidelines for dealing with mental health issues for the sake of clarity and ease of reading, and to update information to reflect changes approved by the General Assembly.
Any questions? YARS and student reps, are you in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners, be advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. We move to recommendation 6.
Yes, moderator, recommendation 6 was pulled from the consent agenda, but it reads as follows: that the prayer of overture number 17, 2018, read the ministry and mental health, be answered in terms of this report.
Moved and seconded.
Yes, moved and seconded by the same mover and seconder.
Yaris, are you in favor? Oh, sorry. Or any questions?
Number 6 we pulled. Yes, correct.
Okay. So Yaris and student reps, are you in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners, you've been advised. Commissioners, how do you vote? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. 7. Okay. We move to recommendation 8.
Recommendation 8, moderator, is regarding a different topic than the ones previously considered. That the prayer of overture number 15, 2022, requesting the church to support the efforts to return the Manitou Iniskim stone, be answered in terms of the above report. Recommendation 6 moved and seconded.
Any questions, number 2?
Thank you, moderator. Kathy Gale, Presbyterian of Calgary-McLeod. I just want to offer a brief comment and reflection. It was my privilege to also be a part of this listening session that was held last September that has already been brought to the attention of the Assembly. And it was a very eye-opening and awakening 4 hours for me personally, but also very enlightening, I think, for many people. And I just want to offer encouragement to all commissioners, wherever they come from, that if they have the opportunity to learn about the Indigenous cultures on the lands that they live on, and about the artifacts that might be present in their communities, it is a very valuable and important part of being able to begin the journey of reconciliation. So I just want to offer my support and encouragement for this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? Yours, are you in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners, you've been advised, and you vote. Are you in favor? Here you are. Any opposed? That's carried. Going to quit. Where are we now? Recommendation 9.
Moderator, recommendation number 9 is that the Presbyterian Church in Canada affirms its support for the return of the stone known as the Manitou Inniskim stone and contribute $1,000 in support of the stone's return. Recommendation 9 is moved and seconded.
Yours, are you in favor? Oh, sorry. Any discussion? Yours, are you in favor? Commissioners, you've been advised. Are you in favor? Yes, good. Any opposed? That's carried. Going to recommendation number 10.
Moderator, recommendation 10 is that the Presbyterian Church in Canada affirm the vital importance of returning Indigenous spiritual and cultural artifacts that were taken without permission to the communities from where they were taken. Recommendation 10 is moved and seconded.
Any questions? Are the Yars in favor of this motion? Any opposed? You've been advised. Commissioners, are you in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. And I'll move to recommendation 14.
Moderator, recommendation 14, that the continuing education allowance be increased to $750 effective January the 1st, 2024.
Seconded.
Yes.
Mike 3.
Thank you, Moderator. Chris Clark, Presbyterian of Ottawa. I submitted a amendment to this that's seconded by Jim Pott in Ottawa.
Okay. Did you want to speak to that now?
I'd be happy to. I'm grateful that this got brought up because it hasn't changed since 2001. And I've noticed that many ministers, we don't like to come cap in hand looking for things. I know people whose housing allowance hasn't increased in a decade, and it's because they won't ask. I would like to do some education stuff. We heard about great things happening at our schools. We had a great video of Crieff. And for those of us who live more than 100 kilometers from these places, just getting to them would take my entire education allowance. And so it's a nice perk if you can use it. It's also more than a perk. We're hearing a lot about how much change is happening, how much struggle is happening, how tired ministers are, how many things we need to learn. And so I think it would be helpful. So when I read the report, I was really excited. I started spending money before I got to the end of the report. I don't know if anybody else read it, but the lowest other number given was $900 a year. The next one was $1,100, and then the United Church was a bit over $1,500. And I thought, wow, it's going to go so high from $6. And then it was $750, and I thought, no. So my proposal is that we would make it $1,000, which would still leave us quite near the bottom of education allowances amongst mainline churches, and then increase it $100 a year for 5 years, which means in 5 years from now, we would be where the United Church is today, which I'm guessing means in 5 years we'll be behind them again. But nevertheless, it would be useful. And so that's my motion, and I would test the will of the court for it.
Any other comments? Mike 1.
Roberto DeSandley, Presbyterian of Northern Saskatchewan. I'd like to speak in favor of the motion that was presented, and I agree. I think it is sort of at the moment treated as a perk, something to help with maybe tuition, maybe a little bit of travel or a few meals, but it's certainly not something that would allow you to attend in person an event. I will mention as a St. Andrews Hall alumnus that the Gooder Scholars Program is an excellent program that I look forward to taking part in this year, and there is a bursary available. Hope I'm not out of order.
Mike 2.
Moderator, Kavanaugh, Vancouver Island. I always understood that it was the minimum continuing education allowance, not that it was the continuing education allowance. So that's what I think, I think it should read, that that we are suggesting minimums within our within the denomination. We're not suggesting the exact amount. So I believe it should read that the minimum continuing allowance be increased, and I would speak in favor of the amendment that has been proposed.
Should be a minimum. Okay, that's fine. Our apologies for leaving out, but we understood to be minimum along with other stipend, et cetera. So.
Okay, let's change the motion. Change the amendment that's on the screen.
Minimum.
Adding the word minimum. Wait, so it was 600. So we're waiting for the amendment to be completed. Mike 2.
Christine O'Brien, Presbyterian of Waterloo, Wellington. I am going to try and move that a little bit. How's that? Better. Christine O'Brien, Presbyterian of Waterloo, Wellington. I want to speak in favor. I can't get more excited about this motion. It's not possible. I can't wait to vote. I regularly am hearing stories from people. A lot of pastors come to Creve Hills on personal retreats, and I know how exhausted they are. I know also how essential it is for sessions and congregations to gather to do something besides work. And I do really believe that we need to build opportunities for Sabbath keeping as a spiritual practice into what we do. So this is a great start. I agree. I mean, it would be great to keep up to the United Church, but I think this is a terrific start. So I am super duper in favor.
Thank you. Number 3.
Thank you, moderator. Sean Howard, West Toronto. Well, I personally love the motion and would personally benefit from the motion. I feel it would be helpful to hear an opposing voice. I will have to oppose this amendment because I know of a number of congregations in my own presbytery for which this will further strain their financial position. If we are going to go ahead and vote increases, I'm going to say for ourselves, but for the ministers among us and ministers across the country, then I think something needs to be done to recognize that this will put further financial strain on congregations that are already struggling. I have no suggestion to make, but I wanted to insert that into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 1.
Thank you, Barb Sargent from the Presbytery of Essex, Kent. We've heard from a number of teaching elders. I'm a ruling elder, and I appreciate our leaders, and I value the time and the effort and that they put into maintaining and building their skills. And I think as ruling elders, we need to support them. And I'm very much in favor of this amendment because I think our teaching elders need that support.
Mike 3.
Moderator Emma Duncan, Presbytery of Hamilton. I actually agree with my colleague that just spoke, Sean. I have been a minister for 9.5 years, and I'm just starting my third stint as an interim moderator in my presbytery. While I would benefit greatly from this, and I would go and see Christine more often at Creve Hills, I do worry about us putting more financial strain on our congregations, especially at the last General Assembly. We were given a substantial pay increase as well. And so I'm just concerned about the financial health of our congregations. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 1.
Moderator John Borthwick from Presbyterian of Waterloo Wellington. I will be voting in favor of the amendment. As someone who has had a lifelong commitment to lifelong learning, it's been something that I've invested into personally. So over the years, when I've received a modest increase, I've actually invited my treasurer to put it into my continuing education amount as a way of building it up to recognize that for $750 even, one couldn't likely pay for even one course or some conferences and things like that in the 1 year. So I'm delighted to see through this amendment the potential of the church taking a lead in supporting our ministers. I recognize that it would be an increase beyond the $750. The total increase would be $400 a year to a congregation. And if we want ministers to last in pastoral ministry for a long time, say somebody who's been in one congregation for 20 years, then we need to encourage them. And that $400 a year extra investment, I think is money well spent. And since there was a plug for something, people know about me, not what you're thinking, but also this might go towards individuals taking the opportunity of an intermission, which needs to be considered. And if you don't know what an intermission is, I would encourage you go to the abbey.ca and check out our free webinar on intermissions that'll be held at the end of the month.
Thank you. Number 4.
Henry Reinders, Presbytery of Grey Bruce, Maitland. I speak in favor of this motion as well. I am not a minister, I am an elder. And I think it's important to recognize what our ministers do. They are not overpaid by any means with their regular salary. And I have often said to the people in our church that we cannot run the church on the backs of our ministers. And so this is very much deserved by them.
Thank you. Number 3.
James Monroe, Presbytery of Barrie. I'm just trying to understand this section compared to the previous section about the continuing education fund in terms of the resources we as a church provide to our ministers versus the resources a congregation provides to our ministers. And so I'm trying to understand where I am on this particular motion. Is the continuing education fund oversubscribed? Do you reject applications on an annual basis, or is everybody applying for them? Continuing education, I understand that, but a lot of the conversation has been about how ministers are constrained because the existing $600, $750 is not sufficient. I'm trying to understand what other options there are. I'm trying to balance the concern that raising the minimum for a congregation may put stress on someone, but we in this room collectively are going, we want to fund more. So is that fund available, or it's very, very small?
If I could ask the Associate Secretary for Ministry and Church Vocations to perhaps answer your question, that would be appreciated.
Thank you.
He would be able to speak with more detail.
Moderator, briefly, the continuing education allowance that this recommendation and the amendment refers to is the amount that congregations will provide as part of the terms of a minister's call to make allowance for study leave and continuing education. The continuing education fund that you're referring to in the other part of the report refers to a special fund that ministers can apply to for particular program studies. There are two different things. Ministers can apply for the continuing education, but all ministers, in the terms of their call, get the minimum that the General Assembly establishes.
So all ministers aren't eligible for the continuing education fund.
If they meet the criteria and the guidelines
Okay.
with their proposal, yes, their application can be considered.
Okay, thanks, moderator.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, mic number 1, sorry.
Thank you, moderator. Susanna Hamilton, Yar from Prince Edward Island. I would like to speak in favor of this. I'm not a minister, obviously, but I am the daughter of 2 ministers. And I know firsthand how important study leave is. I know that it could be a bit of a strain on some congregations, but ministers do work on study leave, and every minute that they spend on study leave goes back into the church for the rest of the year. And so I know that I can only advise everyone else in the Yar vote later on, but I do think that it is worth it because all the money that is invested does go back to the church in teaching and learning for the congregation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Number 3.
John Reed, Presbyterian Hamilton. Sort of in relation to the question a moment ago, I served as on the committee for continuing education grants for 4 years and was briefly the convener. And I can say that resource is there, but as a committee, we always had to be judicious about making sure those grants went to as many people as possible. And it was often seeing the expense of a lot of these courses and how the continuing education allowance doesn't really cover, as has been said by a number of my colleagues in ministry, cover much. And so, but even then, that is not one thing we also found out on that committee is that so many ministers don't even know that these continuing education grants exist as much as we as committees of the General Assembly would try and promote them. And this is something that makes sure that every single minister has this as part of their call and doesn't need to fill out paperwork to access it as well. And so I speak in favor of this. I also, being mindful, we've heard from mainly teaching elders like myself. If there's any other ruling elders who could perhaps speak to this, because I do also want to be mindful of our congregations and appreciate the input of ruling elders as we consider this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mic 4.
Hello, Anna McIntosh from Huron-Perth Presbytery. I think that I know a lot less about the way that ministers are compensated than a lot of people in this room, but I think that from what I've heard so far today, it seems like there are certain ministers who face a less accessible circumstance than other ministers. It takes a lot more money to get from one place to another. And as a person who traveled from a more rural area here, I know how much it cost me to get from the car to the bus, to the Uber, to the airport, and that alone was extremely pricey. And so I think that in our efforts to become a more diverse and accessible church that is educated in a diverse and accessible way, we need to put focus on giving access to those in less accessible areas to that same type of education so that we can have that type of diversity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And number 3.
Moderator, Clark from Presbyterian Niagara. I'm a ruling elder, and my understanding is that amount is accumulative up to 5 years. So you can take the 5 years, put them together, and you'll have a larger amount for your education.
Okay.
I'm speaking in favor.
Yes, just to clarify or to expand upon what you said briefly, that yes, in the call, all ministers that are called, and also sometimes in appointments, there is continuing education minimum, continuing education allowance promised, and that it is cumulative up to 5 years. So it could be put together for 2 years, 3 years, but up to 5 years. Yes, so it is one avenue of pooling the resources.
Thank you.
Are there any more?
Linda Pollock, Hamilton Presbytery. I would like to speak in favor of this motion. I know that it will perhaps not be something that some of our congregations will smile about at first, but I think if we look at it in terms of parents who've put their kids through university, an average year for my daughter, she takes 4 courses a semester, cost us $9,000. And that is over $1,000 a course, and that's not including her books. So $1,000 a year for a minister to take maybe 1 course is still not in line with what it will cost. So I would like to speak in favor of the motion of starting with the $1,000 and increasing $100 each year.
Thank you. Number 2.
Yes, moderator. My name is Kathy Twynham. I'm from West Toronto. I want to express my conflict about this amendment. I am totally in support of ministers. I'm a ruling elder. I've spent a large part of my life supporting in any way I can any minister that I have worked with. And I absolutely agree that, you know, whatever amount that we decide they should receive as an allowance for continuing education may not be enough. My only concern, and I tend to support my friend Sean Howard on this, in many congregations it would be an added burden. So my concern is to ensure that the amount requested is actually used for continuing education. We've had experience in the past where that has been a concern. So if, you know, a minister requests whatever amount for continuing education, that's wonderful as long as it's used for continuing education. So
Moderator.
I just wanted to express my concern.
Thank you. Moderator, I would remind everybody 2 things. One, that there are continuing education guidelines, which you can find on the Ministry and Church Vocations website. And also it's a responsibility of the presbytery to ensure that all continuing education requests are approved. So the continuing education request comes to the presbytery. And so there is oversight. So a minister is not to just go off on a continuing education without the presbytery's awareness. And also congregations are to set aside the money. So if they do accumulate it, it needs to be accessible. If they can accumulate it for more than 1 year. So a few factors to keep in mind. There is oversight because the presbytery has responsibility in that area.
Okay, number 3.
Robert Royal, Oak Ridges Presbytery. I will move, and this is seconded by David Wilson of the Presbytery of Brandon. A call for the vote, please.
Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to vote to take an immediate vote. Yars, are you in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Commissioners, you've been advised. Are you in favor of an immediate vote? Any opposed? Okay. We are voting on the amendment on the screen that the minimum continuing education allowance be increased to $1,000 effective January 1st, 2024, and that it increases $100 per year for the following 5 years. And Yars, how do you vote? In favor? Commissioners, or any opposed? Commissioners, you've been advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? It carries. 18. Recommendation 18.
Okay. Moderator, we move to recommendation 18 under Presbyterian World Service and Development report. Is there a question? Sorry.
Moderator, that was we just approved the amendment. We haven't approved the amended motion yet.
Motion as amended.
I thought we did that. Okay.
One more.
Okay. Looking at the screen. Now do I have to ask the R's again? Are you in favor? Including the R's? Yeah. No. Any not in favor? It's carried.
And now these guys.
Where are we? Uh-oh. What's happening here?
Sorry, Roberto DeSandley, Presbyterian Northern Saskatchewan. I think there's the mutterings of confusion are whether that was the YAR vote or the general vote. And I think we just need a little clarification on
We
each
did
vote.
both. Sorry, we'll do it separately. Okay. Yars, will you vote again? Are you in favor? Yars and student reps. Yes, commissioners have been advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Okay. So now we're 18.
Yep. Okay. So we now move to recommendation number 18 under the Presbyterian World Service and Development portion of the report. Recommendation 18, moderator, reads that that congregations and individuals be encouraged to advocate for legislative changes that would enable Canadian civil society organizations like Presbyterian World Service and Development to provide humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. And Teresa McDonald-Lee spoke to that in her part of the report earlier. Recommendation 18 is moved and seconded.
Any questions? Yars and student reps, are you in favor? Commissioners be advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Recommendation 23.
Moderator, recommendation 23 is that appreciation be expressed to the congregations, individuals, and groups who support Presbyterians sharing with prayers, financial gifts, and volunteering for committees and working groups, participating in programs and advocacy campaigns for justice. Recommendation 23 is moved and seconded.
Any questions? Yars and student reps, are you in favor? Any opposed? Yars or commissioners be advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Recommendation number, oh, we're done.
Just have a few comments.
Mhm.
Moderator, the recommendations have all come before the court with discussion and adoption accordingly. But I would like to just end with a few comments. First, to say that we are grateful to God for the legacy of faith and hope left by those who have shared planned gifts with the church. And through these funds, initiatives such as those that were adopted earlier by the General Assembly during the International Affairs Committee report are able to be implemented. So we are grateful for those planned gifts and other funds that the Life and Mission Agency Committee oversees, as well as other committees, have specific terms of reference, and they are carefully adhered to and reviewed on a regular basis. But just to affirm that we are grateful for all gifts to Presbyterian sharing and planned gifts as well. In addition, I would just like to thank past members of the Life and Mission Agency, the current members of the Life and Mission Agency Committee, and future, because the committee to nominate report has not been adopted yet, but the future committee members who will be serving on the committee, to thank everybody and the staff advisory committees, everybody who works well as a good team, to all who work so well to enable the work of the Life and Mission Agency to move forward in the many ways that it does. A couple of other things, moderator. We have a new associate secretary working under the Life and Mission Agency, and that's Callie Long, who is associate secretary for communications. And I know some people have had a chance to meet her at the communications desk at the back, but just to acknowledge that she began her work in October. So we thank Callie for joining the team. And moderator, on a more somber note, this year, 4 former mission staff who served with global partners passed away this year. And we are grateful to God for their witness, their work, and their life. And I name specifically the Reverend Charles Scott, Clarabelle McIntosh, Dr. Pauline Brown, and the Reverend Roger Talbot. Moderator, the work that the church does together through all of its committees of the General Assembly in Canada and around the world would not be possible without the generous support that is given to Presbyterian Sharing, PWS&D, and many special funds of the church which enable those committees to do the work. So on behalf of a grateful church, we thank all individuals and congregations that are so very generous with their time, talents, prayers, and financial gifts that support the work that we do together. And each year, the church is the recipient of legacy gifts, which I mentioned earlier, and we are indeed grateful for all of those who support and strongly support the work of the church. Moderator, I believe that concludes.
Well, I want to acknowledge number 4 before you do my apologies.
Yes, my apologies. Sometimes
Number 4.
Hello, Seth Law from.
Hold on just a second. Okay. We're going to watch a video and then we'll get to.
Okay. Okay.
Number 4.
Hello, Seth Law from VR from Central Alberta. I had submitted a motion. I was reading through the reports, and number 10 had caught my eye when we are trying to support.
Do you have a seconder?
Yes, Donna Richard, Central Alberta.
Okay.
Sorry. When I was reading the recommendation number 10 about returning artifacts to the correct Indigenous populations, I felt that there should be some support for monetary backing and also some resources from like the archives and that to just help congregations help return them, because a lot of them cannot afford that, and it would just be helpful to have some backing.
I'm going to ask the clerk to address that. Or no, maybe you can.
Thank you for bringing this up. This is an important question, and returning anything that may be in the possession of congregations that was taken without permission from Indigenous people or Indigenous communities is an important part of the Church's work and Canada's work of healing and reconciliation. I should just say that if there was any congregation that was in possession of anything that should be returned, we would always work with the presbytery, the congregation, the synod, any colleges, any committees, to help them in any way that we could to return anything. There would already be some funds available for that, and so we wouldn't need to establish new funds, as there are some already in place.
Perfect. Thank you.
If that
Would you like to withdraw the motion?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. Bob, number 3.
Bob Wilson, Presbytery of Assiniboia. Moderator, through you, I'd like to thank the LMA for this report. And in particular, I would like to emphasize the hard work that Presbyterian World Service and Development does in assisting congregations who want to support refugees. One of the congregations in my presbytery happens to be the congregation in which I most often worship. First Presbyterian Church had applied for refugees from Sudan for a family and had been attempting to get them to Canada for 6 years. Through Presbyterian World Service and Development's efforts on our behalf, we were successful in having the family of 5 join us for their very first winter on December the 15th of this past year. And they are doing very well, but without the work of PWS&D, it probably would have been an impossible task. We did wait for 6 years, but we are very grateful for the assistance that made it possible. So thank you, through you, moderator, to PWS&D for this especially important work.
Thank you, Bill. Bob, sorry. Mike 4.
Henry Reinders, Presbytery of Grey Bruce, Maitland. I would like to thank Teresa McDonald-Lee for her excellent PWS&D report and specifically highlight the Canadian Food Grains Bank portion of that report. I have a bias there because I have been involved with Canadian Food Grains Bank with a growing project in our Meaford area for many, many years. It does wonderful work. I have been to Malawi on a learning tour with Canadian Food Grains Bank, seeing the Presbyterian Church projects there. Amazing results when you hear a farmer say that through some of the simple training he's had, he's increased his production by 600%. It means a world of difference to those folks. I am the Ontario Regional Rep for Canadian Food Grains Bank, and of course the Presbyterian Church is one of 15 members that make up the Food Grains Bank, and I would encourage you all to learn more about the Food Grains Bank. One of the things we do as reps in our provinces, and we have reps in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, as well as eastern provinces here, is we are free to come to your church to speak about the work of Canadian Food Grains Bank, and I would encourage you to do that. One of the things that we're also doing is trying to connect rural congregations and urban congregations through Grow Hope projects. Guy has an excellent one going in the Toronto area, and it's a great way to learn more about rural life if you're an urban person. So I encourage you to look up Canadian Food Grains Bank, look at who we are, and become involved with that. I think I'm the only Presbyterian on staff currently at Canadian Food Grains Bank, and so please use us to your benefit.
Thank you.
Moderator, the report of the Life and Mission Agency is now completed, so thank you to everybody. Now the motion to adopt the report as a whole, moved and seconded.
Yars, are you in favor? And student reps? Any opposed? Commissioners, you've been advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator.
Moving now on to the Church Doctrine Committee. Oops, sorry. Number 3.
Moderator, I just wanted to we'd like to remove one of the upcoming recommendations on the consent agenda for Church Doctrine Committee.
So the report is introduced by committee member Jeremy Bell-Smith.
Before that begins, moderator, might I just, Matthew Rattan, Presbytery of Barrie, can I register my dissent for the adoption of the report of the whole, and I'll submit my reasons in 10 days.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, moderator. As mentioned, my name is Jeremy Bell-Smith, and I am the secretary of the Committee on Church Doctrine. Our convener, Wally Hong, sends his regrets as he's not able to be with us at the assembly today. Moderator, I will make the motions from the Vancouver Island Presbytery, and they'll be seconded by Roland DeVries of the Presbytery of Montreal. I move that we receive and consider the committee's report. I don't need to do that. Then I don't do that. All right. The committee exists to consider and report on all matters of faith and order which the Venerable Assembly sends to it for consideration. It makes recommendations regarding these things that may impact our confessional position, makes those recommendations to the General Assembly so that we might continue our faithful witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. This past year, we met twice in person, and multiple subcommittees met as well and continued their work through the year. As we reported, many of the projects that we've been moving along include the preambles to the ordination, the relationship between church and state in our post-Christian contexts, and what unity in a church as diverse as ours might look like. We've also begun theological reflection on the doctrine of discovery and exploring the ways it may have influenced our ministry and practice. On behalf of the convener and the whole committee, thank you for the opportunity to serve Christ and his church in this way. Our report contains 2 consent motions, which are our responses to items referred to us by the 147th General Assembly. All motions are moved by myself and seconded by Roland DeVries, Presbytery of Montreal. Then I move that motion that numbers 1 and 2 be adopted by consent.
Moderator, I would like to remove recommendation CDC-002 from the consent agenda.
Me too, and there's only 2 of them, so I guess it's one at a time.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll do the one at a time. Sounds good.
Just to clarify again, a consent agenda, a consent recommendation can't have just one. So we had 2, we're down to 1, so we're just going to do them one by one now.
All right. So the first recommendation is that the documents listed above be noted as historic documents, and we recommended to the church to be referred to as needed.
Any discussion? Number 1.
I'm Matthew Rattan, the Presbytery of Barrie. It's really just, I support the idea of listing them as historic documents, absolutely. My question is really just for clarity, because in the documents, which have been many over the years, there's kind of 4 categories, the last of which says documents which were circulated but not approved, and it lists some, but then the recommendation is they're all historic documents. So I just wasn't sure what exactly that meant and wondered if I could have some clarity before I know how to vote on that.
Thanks. So what has happened there is that there are documents that the General Assembly has approved that become statements of the church. There's documents that we've referred to the General Assembly that have been sent down for study, but they were not approved. And so what we are suggesting is that while we itemize those differently and talk about them differently, we consider all of them historical documents of the church.
Okay, that's helpful, thanks. Just the thought was there's, pretty believe that 2 of them, the one in the category 2, what the Bible teaches on covenanted monogamous same-sex relationships. Category 4, the historic argument concerning human sexuality. So these are both produced co-jointly by the Doctrine Committee in 2017. They were part of the ongoing discussion. So is the idea that the one arguing for historic male-female marriage is not continued to be used as a resource when the other one was? So I guess just clarity on that, because I think they're both part of the ongoing discussion. So I'm not sure if that's kind of going to disappear or not.
Yeah. So my understanding and the way that we've articulated this is that the documents that are listed as approved were ones that were officially endorsed as statements of the church by the assembly. Others that were recommended for reference or that had been worked on and studied by the assembly but not approved are not actual statements of the assembly. They were not adopted as doctrinal statements.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else has more historic or accurate memory on this than me, but I'm pretty sure they're both used for part of the discussion. Neither one of them are doctrine. So I think I'll have to vote against the motion then, because to me this indicates that those 2 documents will not be treated equally, and I think at the time that they were intended to be so as historic documents as a part of the ongoing discussions. Thank you.
Any more questions? Number 3.
James Monroe, Presbyterian of Barrie. Just to follow up on my fellow commissioner's comment, it's the second section, the other related documents are. Does that imply that they were approved or just circulated? I think it would be cleared up, and I don't want to edit the report, but that second section, section 3 and 4 say here are things that were approved, here are things that were not approved. But section 1 and 2 does not make it clear whether or not those documents were approved or not. So the question, to be specific, was Acts of Proceedings 2017, what the Bible teaches on covenantal magnanimous same-sex relationships. Was that an approved document or not?
Thank you, moderator. So I don't have that list right in front of me, I'm afraid. So I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. My understanding was those ones that were listed as approved were approved by the General Assembly. Thank you. Just to clarify, moderator, through you, the question is in regards to the first section, the documents which address the topic of gender identity, is that correct? You asked about whether they are approved or not approved. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the same section that you're asking the question on. So if you could help me clarify that.
Moderator, with respect to the section that says, here are documents which are on the topic of gender identity, it lists 2 documents. It doesn't say whether or not they were one way or the other. But then in the 4th section, body, mind, and soul is listed as an example of something which was not approved. In the 2nd section, it talks about other related documents. It doesn't say whether or not they were approved or not. And then in the 4th section, the companion report, which was just the second half of the Church Doctrine Committee's report, is expressly listed as not approved. approved, implying perhaps that the first one was. And then it matters for the historical record in terms of interpreting how these were viewed. They're just not, it's not clear. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, we had referenced the history of the church, and again, wasn't the one to put this particular piece together, so I can't say whether that is meant that they were not approved. That is, that they were approved, only that they were not approved by the Assembly as doctrinal statements. Clear as mud.
Number 3.
Thank you, moderator. Sean Howard, West Toronto. I just wondered if, and I didn't bring my card up to see the kinds of motions, but can we lay this on the table until the committee can come back and clarify specifically which reports are in which category? It seems there's some confusion around that, and that seems to be a sticking point. So I would move that we, and correct me if I should have a different motion here, that we lay this on the table until the committee can clarify which reports are in which category. I have no seconder. I have a few seconders.
You see your name as seconder? James Monroe.
Seconded by James Monroe Barry.
Okay.
Point of order, moderator. I just have a
The
question
motion-
or clarification.
Please, just a moment. Oh,
Good.
you address
I
this?
just want to know what that means. I'm sorry. I'm not a new commissioner, but I should know, but I don't know what that means.
We're going to postpone it until we're ready to talk about it again.
Okay.
Moderator, it means that someone, if we vote to table, that means that someone who has voted to table will have to make a motion at an appropriate time later on to remove the report from being tabled, and then we'll get back to it where we're at.
Moderator, Roberto DeSandley, the Presbyterian of Northern Saskatchewan. I have the acts and proceedings from 2017. The recommendation 4 is the one dealing with those two documents. I believe 593 is the page where it is covered, but page 28 is where it reads recommendation number 4. Yeah, page 539. Sorry, switch those. Was moved, duly seconded with an amendment, and the amendment was defeated, and then the recommendation was adopted. So there was a change in the title of what the Bible teaches was changed to an alternate understanding of, and then that recommendation was
Excuse
adopted.
me, can we just pause for a minute? Okay, at the moment, we're going to deal with the motion to table.
Moderator, if I may, if the information that is being sought is at hand, I'm willing to withdraw the motion. I just thought that was the sticking point. So if it is an ongoing sticking point, then I will stay with the motion. But if we have the information at hand, I'm happy to withdraw.
Moderator, I'm not sure the information would answer all the questions at this point. So I think we're better off to go through, table the motion, have some time to look to see if it's going to answer all the questions that have been brought up, and then return to this when it's opportune.
Okay. Are you in agreement with that? Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're voting on the motion to table. Are you in favor? Any opposed? It's tabled for now.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Do you want me to do number 2 now? I'm just following the orders of those that know more than me, which is a whole lot of people.
We have a
Sean? Which one is Sean? Did you ask for the motion to be tabled? Was it the motion or the report that you wanted tabled?
Of the motion. The motion, the question is on the motion. So I was just asking that the motion be tabled.
All right.
Okay, moving to recommendation 2.
Thank you, moderator. On recommendation 2, moved and seconded.
That the intention of the Committee on Church Doctrine be affirmed to continue exploring the questions and realities around medical assistance in dying, and its intention to submit reflections to the General Assembly that will assist the Church to respond faithfully and practically. Okay, number 3.
Moderator, I submitted an amendment to this recommendation. Angela J. Collini, Presbytery of Pickering, and seconded by Mark Chang, Presbytery of Edmonton, Lakeland.
Okay, the amendment is on the screen.
Moderator, I move this amendment to the motion as presented because I feel that the response of the Committee on Church Doctrine does not emphasize or put into action the spirit and intention of the 147th General Assembly. If the Committee on Church Doctrine is truly aware that the landscape around medical assistance in dying has developed significantly in current years, they will understand the important implications that continue to impact children of God and families in our church. As a pastor who has walked with those who have chosen MAGE, said prayers holding their hand as they took their last breath, and walked with their family as they grieved their beloved family's loss, I am deeply saddened by the church's response, my church's response, to such an important issue. Losing a loved one or choosing MAGE has wide-reaching implications. We need a new document using terms everyone understands that are currently relevant, and not using terms that are harmful or triggering. God loves all of us, and to add stigma is harmful and judgmental.
Mike 1.
I just need a second because I also had an amendment and it's not that one. So she got here first. So let me just think.
Okay, number 2.
Kathy Gale, Calgary McLeod. I came to the mic to speak to the original motion 2, but I can support this amendment, and I would speak in favor of the motion as a whole if it was to pass. Just as a background, our session had lengthy discussions similar to what has been expressed a few minutes ago, and about the importance of updated and gracious language. And we felt strongly that the language needed to be updated and to be more reflective of our current times. This was also a topic of discussion at our presbytery, and similar comment was made. So thank you very much, moderator, for that moment.
Thank you. Number 1.
Thank you, Matthew Rattan from the Presbytery of Barrie. So now this amendment is on the floor. So we'll vote on the amendment and then we can continue. Okay.
Okay.
So I think I'll hold for now until after this is dealt with.
Okay, number 3.
Thank you, moderator. Tom Summers, Presbytery of Halifax and Lunenburg, would like to speak in favor of this as well, and the need for us as a denomination to really be able to address the realities of medical assistance in dying in our society, and to be able to provide language that is very helpful and not harmful to people. And so I would very much affirm the need for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3.
Sean Howard, West Toronto. Moderator, I would be much more comfortable allowing the Committee on Church Doctrine to use the terminology that through its explorations it finds best. I'm not here to advocate for one term over another. I'm here to advocate for the freedom of the committee. The reason that I bring this up is I know at a previous assembly where I was present and a report was made, and I know we can get lost in terminology, and I don't want to, but I know the point has been made in the past that a particular terminology was chosen by the committee for its own purposes. And so I would speak against that aspect of the motion, but I'm in support of the remainder. So as it stands, I would need to vote against the motion. I think they need to come up with their own terminology and inform the assembly, not the other way around. Thank you.
Number 2.
Moderator Courtney Crawford from Presbyterian of Waterloo Wellington. I would speak in favor of this amended motion. I have journeyed as a minister. I have journeyed with families who have gone through the MAID process, and some of them have done so on their own because they have been concerned about what the church would think about this, and that they would offend others. People would not think they were Christian and of deep faith. And I think that we need to do better and to work together to provide support as a church related to families and individuals dying with grace and surrounded by a community, a Christian community of love.
Thank you. Number 3.
Thank you, moderator. Neil Ellis, Lindsay Peterborough. I speak in favor of the amendment as well. And I would note that the term medical assistance in dying, MAID, is the term that is used by the government of Canada. And having that consistency of language within our documents will make it easier for our ministers and for the members of our denomination to better understand and have a sense of how we as a denomination are working through and dealing with this issue, which is a deep import for us. So I speak in favor of the amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We'll move on now to, we're going to vote on the amendment before you. Yaris, how would you vote? In favor? Opposed? Commissioners have been advised. How do you vote? Those not in favor? The amendment carries. Okay, now we'll vote on the motion as amended. Go ahead.
Thank you, moderator. Matthew Rattan, Presbytery of Barrie. I just want to share a few thoughts as it relates to this. I will speak in favor of the motion, but just highlight a few things why I think this is of a particular pastoral nature and urgent. I do take issue with the term medical assistance in dying. I prefer physician-assisted death. I think it's actually still a neutral term, but is anyway. I do support the thrust of the motion, but part of the reason I think this is of an urgent pastoral care is because the landscape is changing so rapidly. I've talked to funeral directors, I've talked to families and people, and it's a very challenging situation. But also I think people need to be aware of how quickly it's changing. Some of the checks and balances as it relates to different pathways to take physician-assisted death or MAID, those are changing. Some of the checks and balances are becoming lessened. Also, there has been a plan to expand this to people struggling with mental illness. To me, that seems a bit counter to some of the work we've done in terms of mental well-being and life and joy and everything else. So it's a challenging situation. I'm happy that Bill C-39 will delay that because they acknowledge that more work needs to be done. But it's a matter of grave concern how this is accelerating and broadening in the culture. So I support that we practically move on and reflect on it theologically and urgently. I know that there's no timeline indicated, but my hope is we would see this as an urgent matter of pastoral concern.
Thank you. Okay, so as amended. Okay, number 2.
Leslie Kinghorn from the Presbytery of Niagara. I'm sorry, somewhere along the line, I think I'm missing some of the point. The medical assistance in dying is a very personal thing between the patient and the family. Are we looking at the church being a part of the conversation in them making that decision? Or are we looking at being the support, just the background support after the decision has been made to help them get through what people still think is a stigma?
Thank you. That's a good question. So this conversation has been ongoing in the church for at least the last 7 years, and informally before that as well. Let's try that. Is that better? All right. My apologies. The conversation has been ongoing within the church for the last number of years, and the church produced a paper, or rather the Church Doctrine Committee produced a paper that was an attempt to respond to that made a number of cases and used language that the General Assembly that it was presented to struggled with. That assembly changed its title. And so that is the issue that we're responding to. However, in direct response to your question, what I understand and what I believe the church is trying to do is say this is a reality that we're facing. Our pastors are journeying with people who want to know that God is with them in these trying moments, in these times of transition. And what is the church's stance, and how does the church respond to that? And so that's why it was originally sent to the Church Doctrine Committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Number 1.
Peggy Lennings, Presbytery of Waterloo, Wellington. Moderator, I support the spirit of the amendment. I just question the timeline. This is the 148th General Assembly, and that says 150th. And people talk about urgency, and I don't think 2 years reflects urgency. I don't want to change the amendment, but I don't think that timeline, perhaps that's what it would take, but I think that we should try and do better as a church.
Number 3.
Moderator Angela J. Clooney, Presbyterian Pickering. My intention would be today, but I know that the church, my friends on the Committee on Church Doctrine need time to work. So my hope would be that they would be able to come back next year to General Assembly, 149th year, with a preliminary document and possibly a final document and 150th General Assembly. I was just giving the church an opportunity to do its work, which takes time and study and reflection and prayer.
Thank you. Number 1.
Hi there, moderator. Byron Kappas, Presbytery, Bruce Maitland. I wanted to speak to something very briefly that was mentioned a couple people back about the language. First of all, I agree that made is the proper language, but also to make it an issue of mental health, I think is not helpful. To the idea that doctors would not do their due diligence and in their relationship with their patients. I know we get a little paranoid about doctors, they don't care about their patients, but I think the reality is that's not true. And to tokenize people with mental health issues for this issue, I think is an improper way of looking at it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3.
Moderator Chris Clark, Presbytery of Ottawa. I would be so bold as to move that we change it to 149th because it doesn't need to be a final document. It could just be a document. And I also think we're basically telling them we want a way to do this and walk alongside people, which takes some of the work out, right? Because we're taking one of the options off the table almost before we even start, which is maybe crass to say openly, but is true. So I would move, I don't have a seconder, but I would love to see 149. Oh, you can pick, I guess. Or friendly amendment is what I'm hearing.
Doug Kendall. Seconding. All right, Yars, are you in favor of this amendment? Any opposed? Commissioners are advised. How do you vote? Are you in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. This is the amended motion that the Committee on Church Doctrine produce a document for the 149th General Assembly using the term medical assistance in dying made that will assist the church to respond faithfully and practically in pastoral situations. Yeah. Okay. Yars, how do you vote? And are you in favor? Any opposed? Commissioners have been advised. Are you in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. We're
Thank you,
moving now to
moderator.
our, thank you, stated hour. Ken Straight? Oh, yeah. He's, where am I now? Back here. Okay. Okay. We'll do the, calling on Ken Straight, a member of the Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations Committee, to introduce our interfaith guest, Rabbi David Ellis. Ken will introduce the rabbi.
Moderator, members and commissioners of this assembly, and our guests. Thank you for the opportunity to actually introduce you to a friend. Rabbi David Ellis is Rabbi at Large for Atlantic Canada, where he focuses on the spiritual needs since 1996 of smaller communities from his base here in Halifax. I want you to imagine old-time Methodist circuit riders on their trusty horse going off way across the prairie or way across the mountain to bring what it is that they would bring to people. Now, picture Rabbi Ellis, who doesn't own a horse and doesn't own a car, not for 40 years, going from Moncton across to Prince Edward Island, taking the ferry back and heading to his beloved Cape Breton to do the work of his ministry amongst his people. Rabbi Ellis has so many hats he wears, and I'll tell you about one of them in a minute. He was a critical member, and in some ways still is, because I'm not sure it still exists after COVID, of a downtown lectionary group here in Halifax. He's been part of this group for decades now, and in that group, I learned more about the Apostle Paul and the book of Romans than I did at seminary. I promise you. In this group, a number of us would come early and we'd catch up on the weekly events, and Rabbi Ellis would share the work that he loved, especially in Cape Breton, which Yamaka, I think he's turned around. Yeah, the Cape Breton tartan, of course. And I'd say, Rabbi, what have you done this week? And I'd tell him that I was working at the Presbyterian Church. I'd say, David, and he would say, oh, I was visiting a little community in Prince Edward Island. And oh, by the way, I spent all day yesterday at the Halifax International Security Forum, where he would be found rubbing soldiers, almost shoulders, with American and Canadian top political and military leaders and giving them advice, which he often did. Now, as the name implies, for we know it from our heritage, Rabbi Ellis is a teacher. Actually, he has a nickname for himself. He's got one for me too, but I won't tell you mine. He's Rabbi Troublemaker. He actually spends every opportunity to open minds and hearts to what is often unique and most often unusual. I'm quite certain that that's how he'll spend his time with us today. And if you were to spend more time with him in Halifax, I'm confident that you too would end up with an invitation to visit him at his home on Norwood Street, where you might find yourself served some of the most, maybe the best latkes in the city. Moderator, commissioners, guests, and friends of the Assembly, I present to you Rabbi David Ellis.
All those approve? Against? Not yet. We'll ask at the end. We'll see what's happening. Okay? Ken, thank you very much for being here. The work is not for you to complete, but neither are you free to desist from it altogether. You've ever heard that? You know who said it? Somebody in my community told me that they worked in Ottawa. They heard Bob Ray say it. I believe Bob Ray's wife is Jewish. And so he apparently put in his vocabulary, the work is not for you to finish, but neither are you free to desist from it altogether. Now, Bob Ray was taking that from a book I'm going to talk about here, the Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the Fathers, the Ethics of the Fathers. I'll explain the title in a minute. But let's think about that. We've got a lot of projects here, things to do. So I'm going to share this work with you because I'm going to describe a project I've been doing. We haven't had the Halifax thing of late, but there's a man who came here a few years ago from Bermuda. One David Atwood is his name. Wife is Margaret Atwood, not the Margaret Atwood, but her name is the same. But he's from Bermuda. And so I said to myself, oh, Bermuda, that's monkeys and palm trees and coconuts and bananas and things like that. Wait a minute. This guy is really highly educated. He reads James Joyce's Ulysses. He quotes things. He had a career as a civil servant in Bermuda, and he came to the School of Theology here, and he got a degree in ministry. He'd been active in the church in Bermuda for many years, but he came here and got his full degree here. And in the process, he went to the classes in the Hebrew language at the School of Theology here. And I got to know him because he would come by both synagogues in Halifax just to hear the service being said in Hebrew. And I know the people there understand what's going on. No, they don't. But it does the Hebrew there. So he was able to follow it at his own accord in that. I followed him as he went to Prince Edward Island. He has a church over in the outskirts of Charlottetown now. And he kept in touch with me. And he got a group going. And it's a lectionary group similar to the one we had here in Halifax, except it's done by Zoom nowadays. And so we take the portion of the week, and we've got some interesting people there. We have another very talented minister. We have a professor from the law school. We have a retired doctor. We have an old friend of mine who's professor of English at the University of Texas at Odessa. And we just get a group of people. We all have open observations and thoughts about the lectionary of the week. And we are not afraid to ask questions. We're not afraid to be critical. Nobody's going to try to do anybody in, but we can ask questions and have that out. And that's kind of the way we do sort of things. And it's the Jewish way. I can get abusive and get out of hand perhaps in that, but it's the Jewish way to look for differences and to look for disputes and things. It's a whole principle about things. So I've been kind of confused by some of the things I've been seeing in your group here. I've been seeing everybody come up, and most of it's all kind of unanimous sort of things in this. Let me tell you something. There's something in the Talmud, in the Second Temple period. The Bible itself prescribes the death penalty for certain various events. Theoretically, it's in writing in the Bible. But the Jews do not go by the written Bible. We go by the Bible as it's interpreted by the Jewish tradition of the ages, the sages, the rabbis of the Talmud, whatever you want to call them. We're going to see who they are here in a minute in the Ethics of the Fathers. But the Bible is not read literally. It's not followed literally. It's only by the interpretation of that. So what the rabbis over the years have done is they have abolished the death penalty in practice, although not in writing. You don't take out something that's already written in the Bible. You don't amend it. You don't erase it. You don't blot it out. It's written there, but what do? You do things around it to effectively deny it, even though it may still be written that way. So in the time of the Second Temple period, when they still had theoretically the death penalty on the book, but it was never perhaps practiced outright, there was a rule that the death penalty in the Talmud in the time of the Sanhedrin went by a majority vote. It had to have a Sanhedrin of 23 judges, and there had to be a majority of opinion to be able to commit someone to capital punishment. There were many provisions for it, but they had to have a majority opinion of 12 or more against the minority. If there was ever a vote for conviction of the person that was unanimous, all 23 to 0, the person was acquitted. Now, why does that say? But it was unanimous. Nobody disagreed with it. Let's get rid of the guy who says acquit. No, that's not the Jewish way of doing things. What was going on there? Somebody should have said something. The laws of evidence are very complicated. Somebody should have raised a voice against it there. There should have been at least one dissenting vote. Somebody should have made some points there. Somebody looked at this. They didn't look at it carefully enough. If it was a whole unanimous decision, there was some kind of collusion there perhaps. And so if you're having a dissenting vote, that is not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing. Whoever is proving something has to prove their case in that. So it's going to say in the Ethics of the Fathers, there are two types of arguments. There's an argument for the sake of heaven, and there's an argument not for the sake of heaven. What is an argument for the sake of heaven? I'll give you some examples of some of the sages listed here. There's Hillel and Shammai, who lived at the time of Jesus. They have disputes throughout the Talmud, total, absolute disagreements about what the Jewish law or Jewish practice is. Completely opposite disagreements on all kinds of, they have many things in common too, but they have dispute after dispute in every tractate of the Talmud about what the Jewish law is. Did that create animosity? Did that create hatred? No. It created a great deal of respect because you know something? One part of the Mishnah says that Hillel and Shammai, although they had different categories of who was considered to be Jewish, who was eligible for Jewish marriage, the relatives of Hillel and Shammai intermarried with one another. They informed one another who was marrying, if they were fit the various criteria for both of them. They were married with that. And so they disagreed on things. But the argument was highly praised because what did it do? It strengthened things out. It got to things out. It made people think about things. We go by Hillel's opinion for practical purposes. And there's a reason for that. You know why? Hillel, before he ever gave his own opinion, he let the opponent speak first. And if the opponent didn't get it right, he said, well, just a minute, let me say this a little louder. So this, way, this. And then Hillel also was famous for never getting mad at anything. There was a man who lost $400 in his day for trying to make, I bet I can make Hillel mad. So he wouldn't go around and try to insult him, try to annoy him. And he said, oh, that's a good question you're asking. A good question. He said, just a minute. I've lost money because of you, Hillel. It's better that you lose money than Hillel should lose his temper. And so you have these disputes in there. So that's the example wherever you have Hillel and Shammai, they're discussing things. We're practically following Hillel's opinion. There are other opinions in the Talmud that are not followed, but they're important anyway because they might be studied someday. And we want to understand what the basis was behind the negative opinion for that then. And so that's part of the whole Jewish. So can't you just get on with it? Just do that? And yes, we do that. We follow Hillel's things. But there's a practical understanding that's important also. So it's good to know that. What's an argument that's not for the sake of heaven? There's a story. Do you know the story in the book of Numbers, chapter 16, about Korah? Story of Korah there. He has his followers, And he and his followers get together and they go against Moses and Aaron. Says, Moses, why are you leading the people here? Aaron, why do you have the priesthood here? Isn't everybody holy? Can't we all do this here? You trying to raise yourselves above everybody here? Can't we just make this all equal and everything? And so it looks like there's an argument between Korah and Moses here about the leadership. But that's not what the ethics of the fathers say. What is an example of an argument that is not for the sake of heaven? It's between Korah v'adato, Korah and his followers. Now, what does that mean? If you read the story carefully, you will see, and if you look at most people who are arguing for the bad purpose, you'll see within the dissenting group that there is a disagreement among that group itself. And there's askew purposes. There are people who are really doing it for the right thing will get together and have some community in that. But people who are doing it just for the sake of argument, just strictly for askewed reasons and that, they will have disputes among themselves. And that's what the ethics of the fathers says, an argument not for this. It's something like Korah and his followers, because you know something, they didn't agree on things, or they were both fighting among themselves as to who was going to do things with that thing. And so this is one part of things we have here. The ethics of the fathers starts out, and why is it with the fathers here? Don't we need some updated language? I've been hearing that phrase. Yeah, maybe, but maybe not. We have the tradition that's put together of the people who are doing it. There are male figures there. You can find references to women. Also, the women were there, but they may have been in the background, but that doesn't mean they weren't present. We have this phrase of Merleau-Ponty, the French philosopher, the prejudice of the actual. We're too much into literal texts and that. What's behind the text? What's going on in the background of the text? What's being said directly? What's being unsaid? What's being implied there? If you read carefully, there's a lot of things unwritten, unsaid, but the women play a role within things than that. But it is talking about the fathers, the men, and that. There's a reason for that too, though. If you turn the pages, God forbid, let's just turn the news tonight, if there's been a mass shooting somewhere, if there's been some kind of terrorism somewhere, if there's been some wanton act of war somewhere, if there's been some swindle on Wall Street, some sexual perversion or rape, something like that, who has caused it usually? A man or a woman? Usually a man, not just in our day and time, but throughout history and that. And so what the Jewish tradition is looking at here, we're creating a male society here, not a chauvinistic society, but it's saying, you know, the people of the Greco-Roman times when this was written, they're busy going about doing things, fighting in war, getting involved in commerce and things like this. We're going to have a group of men, but they're not going to battle each other. They're not going to conquer things. They're going to have a conquest of ideas and words and argue among themselves over a biblical text and find things from that to make life better. And that's what the arguments could be. They might shout a little bit, they might pound on the desk, but that's going to be the battle, that not going out and bashing things and causing mayhem in the world and that. So this is what the ethics of the fathers is trying to do. And the book is, I'll give you sources for it. I'll pass this around. If you'll pass this around to others, I'll give you to be able to send it out. You can find this themselves, study it for yourself. I would advise you in your communities, if you go back to them, the Ethics of the Fathers can be read. It's an English translation of that, but the Ethics of the Fathers is not to be read, even though you can do that. It has to be studied, and it has to be studied with somebody who knows some of the background behind it. In the first instance, that means a Jewish person, a rabbi, a learned person who knows some of the history and background of it. You can read it for yourself and get some of the ideas, but there's a lot of things there, and you don't necessarily have to read it in the order it is there. You can read it in various places, and what I would do is select things out that I think are most relevant according to people's interests. There's a rule, ein muharvim, but there's no earlier or later in Jewish study, and that you can study the first, last first, and so whatever it is. I've taken this into prisons before. And it speaks to anybody of any religion. Some of them are more specifically Jewish, but many of them are quite general. Many of them speak to general common intelligence that anybody of any culture, any religion has. And there's no theology there. There's no complicated creeds or anything that anybody has to adhere to. Just listen to the common sense and see if it makes sense to you. And if it does, go back into your community, find a local rabbi or a teacher there and see if they can do a little module program for you and some of your people. I think you'll find some interesting things here. Because this David Atwood on Prince Edward Island, he and I have a session with this each week, and we learn these sayings of the fathers, and these sayings go into his sermons every week. And his sermons are outstanding for somebody who's just barely starting in the ministry. He's bringing a whole life experience to it, but he's getting things out of this. So I share this with you here. Now let's look at the first one here. Maybe I should have got it here, but you'll read it and follow with me here. The first one says, Moses received, now it says, the translation says the Torah, but there's no definite article in the Hebrew. It says Moses received Torah from Sinai. Not necessarily the 5 books. That may be the case of arguments about that, as you know, from biblical studies in school. But whatever it is, Moses received Torah from Mount Sinai. And he passed it on to different people, to Joshua. Joshua passed it on to the elders. You can see these people described in the book of Judges. The elders passed it on to the prophets, and the prophets to the members of the great assembly. Now, who are the members of the great assembly? These are the people described in those books. You don't read very much in the Bible. You get the lecture, you get a little bit of it, but they're the people described in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and then also the authors of the book of Chronicles. But in Ezra and Nehemiah, you have these people who came back from Babylonia, and they were the Sophrim. They were the readers, the scholars in this. And there were people who came back. They built the temple, and they came back and did things. But just a minute, something happened while they were in exile there. They did not have a temple there. And so was the religion over? No. They didn't have the temple there, but they studied the laws of the temple written in the books of the Bible. They wrote some books themselves there. They wrote some of the Psalms there. And most of all, they read and studied those books. And you can see in Ezra and Nehemiah the discussions that people had over that. It wasn't just going back. Now, did those people come back and say, okay, we've got a new thing here. Let's start a new religion here? No, let's keep the old religion going. We've got the temple, but let's build the temple there. Book of Haggai talks about building the temple. Let's build the temple. It's going to do that. Then Ezra was part of the priestly class. Let's build the temple, but we're going to have both of them operate at the same time. Just because we've got the temple back, we don't have to throw away these commentaries and studies and tradition we started in Babylonia and brought back. We can keep both of them going. What ended up happening is that the tradition of the reading and study of the Bible eventually, without abolishing the priesthood, without abolishing the temple in Jerusalem, eventually the temple was destroyed, but the game was not over then because Judaism moved to a new phase where they were studying and reading books, arguing about books, learning books, having a give and take about books, seeing if it applied to life. What instance did it apply to for this? This is what Jewish tradition was. This is what the ethics of the fathers is. A series of sayings of various people who start from the time of...
The sermon could continue later.
Okay. Come on. 1 second. Okay. Anyway, let me give you one example here. Hillel. And you'll hear an alliteration here. Mili. If I am not for myself, who is for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when? Now, these are things there. They're often things, several phrases put together. It's up to you to decide what it is. What is it saying? What is it not saying? What is it eliminating saying? And if you see 3 things put together, 4 things put together, 2 things, sometimes they're paradoxical. Why are they put together? That's for you to figure out yourself. It's not something just to be read. It's something to be argued with and figured out with that then. If you're interested in this, get in touch with me. I'd be glad to help you start a module sometime online or something like this, or again, go to your own communities and do this. But I think you would find, if you look into this book, you would find tools that you could use with everyday people in your congregation that speaks to secular people. You don't have to be deeply theological, deeply godly or that. It's everyday language that speaks to people. That I think it'd be a great tool to use in your congregations. With all due respect.
Great wisdom. Thank you. Rabbi Ellis, this is a gift from the Presbyterian Church for you. Thanks for your wisdom. We're in a kind of a rush, but you know, we will definitely. I've heard some things that I will ask. Maybe
The work is not to complete, but you can't desist from it either.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Moderator,
maybe-
I warned you he was a teacher.
Yes, he was. He is. You want to just stand up for a minute? Yeah, I'm just very tired. I know that you probably are too. Just stretch one arm up, other arm up, and then try to remember what Rabbi Ellis said. The last part. I got my tea. Okay, Terry is going to, you can remain standing. Terry is going to give us some announcements. And somebody did say they wanted to sing, so we'll do one little verse of the Cree song.
I'm going to read off a few names, and these are the names of those of you who have not yet checked your travel. So please go and check it, or we'll hear your names again. Jean Morris, Randall Phillips, James Lawrenson, Sandra Copeland, Hugh Donnelly, Ann and Jack Jameson, John Carr, Anusko Inang, forgive my pronunciation, Christine O'Brien, Dorothy Visser, Alfred Lee, the Johan family, Wanda Robinson, Marcus Arsenault, Hinston Chen, Don Walcott, Joshua Shankala, Wochung Lee, Ian McCready, Joan Kerr, and Courtney Crawford. Please go and check off so that we know that you have seen your bus time, because we got to arrange the buses according to the numbers that we have. This evening at 5:30, Knox College is holding a reception in the McNally foyer. The committee to confer, though, is asked to meet over here in the corner to my left. And tomorrow afternoon over lunch, the alumni of Presbyterian College are asked to gather by one of the tables in the cafeteria, and Roland will make sure that there's a sign on those tables. And be amiss if I did not mention of the concert tonight of the Orpheus Choir that many of us know through Glenn Davis. So make Glenn happy tonight.
Okay.
Thanks, moderator.
Thank you. Before we continue with hope and, what is it? Hope and possibility with our clerk, principal clerk, I'm going to, let's say, do this little song again. Da wow peace to quay. Oh, you're such good students. Name me waiting. Ewa pamitan. Da wow peace to quay. Okay, together. Da wow peace to quay. We got to sing together now. Sing with me, in other words. Okay. Da wow peace to quay. Near me waiting. Near me waiting. Near me waiting. Ewa pamitan. Welcome, come in. Welcome, come in. I am so glad. I am so glad to be seeing you. To be seeing you. I am so glad. I am so glad. And together. I am so glad. I am so glad to be seeing you. And I'm glad that we got to stand up for 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. And I think that probably has worked off the last of the glucose that was accumulating in us after lunch, which will now give us lots of energy for what we're doing next. All right, so people are probably looking to sit at different tables. That's why they're walking around, I assume. I also realize people may need to do other things that the walking may lead them to. So that's understandable. We're almost done here for the day. We're in our second conversation of our narratives of hope and possibility. And in this one, I'd like to invite us to consider how our structure serves our story. So, stories and structure. Is that what's being shown? Yeah. So I think our structures are always in support of our stories, but I also think that we spend an awful lot of time on our structures. I'm dismissing the moderator. She's gonna sit with one of you. So our structures are always in service of our story, but I wonder if we aren't clear yet on our stories, how well our current structures serve us. So the question is, how do our structures support our stories, and whether they do or not? Do they need to be updated? Do they need to be refined in light of the stories that we are wanting to tell about ourselves? So let me tell you a bit of a metaphor, share with you a bit of a metaphor. How many of you know that the national offices of the Presbyterian Church are moving? Oh, what a relief. We have been talking about this. So the national offices that are located at 50 Winford Drive, right? That's oftentimes what you call it, 50 Winford. They were built, the office building was built in the 1960s in a time when our context was quite different, right? How many of you have been to 50 Winford? Oh, wow. So you know what it's like. It's a big brick building from the architectural school of Lego, right? It's big and square. It's brown. It's actually quite nice. You know, it's kind of mid-century modern, and it's actually quite a nice building. It's a beautiful open area with some beautiful light. I mean, I'd actually like to live there, but well, I do live there pretty much. It was built in the 60s when our context, though, was quite different. Christendom was still very strong, changing, but still very strong. We could still consider our culture a Christian culture. We had a denomination where there were more congregations, more ministers. We were graduating more students. There were more staff at the national office, more relative resources. Maybe not in, explicit dollar figures, but relatively speaking, we probably had more resources. And the building kind of stood all by itself. You know what it's surrounded by? It's surrounded by a post office, some medical buildings. There's a Japanese cultural center. And of course, these days across the street, it's the Aga Khan Center. But it's a Christian denominational building that's all by itself. That's not the context anymore, is it? We have a 21,000, I think roughly 21,000 square feet. It's not super energy efficient, and it's a pretty big environmental footprint. And it's got a lot of room for lots and lots of staff. We're moving to 300 Bloor Street. If you know Toronto, 300 Bloor Street is on Bloor Street between St. George and Spadina. There's a pizza right next to it. we're going to be moving to a far smaller footprint, much more environmentally sustainable footprint. It's a building that has all sorts of environmental certifications. It's going to be a better use of our resources. We also understand the possibilities around remote work. One of the things that the pandemic has brought us or brought more clarity to. So one of the things that brings with it is that currently most of the staff that work at the national office end up, like me, moving to Toronto. If we do more remote work, that allows the national church to draw upon staff from all across the country, wherever they may be living, to say, you know, you don't have to move to the big smoke. You can stay in beautiful Vancouver, or I don't know what to call Calgary anymore. my hometown in Canada that I love. But you know, you don't have to get out of Calgary. You can stay where you are and still be part of the national staff. So that allows us to increase those people that we might be able to call upon as gifts for our national staffing. And I think one of the most important reasons is that we're going to be sharing that space at 300 Bloor. So it's actually going to be 300 Bloor is the home of Bloor Street United Church. And if you've driven by it, you'll see that it's all been torn down other than the two facades. And they're rebuilding that church, but they're building a building next to it. And that's where we're going to be. It's a 4-story building, and it's going to be connected to what's called Pigeon House behind it. And the second story of that building will be dedicated to the archives of the 3 different denominations. And then the third and the fourth floor will be where the 3 denominations will share space. I want to just be very clear. We are sharing space. We're not merging, right? We are not becoming one. Don't let the approaching date of 100th anniversary of 1925 say anything to you. We are retaining clearly our independent identity, as are the United Church. I know they're in fear of being overtaken by us or the Anglicans. We are retaining independence, but we're going to be sharing collaborative space so that our move to become more ecumenical will be supported, right? This is a move to be more intentionally ecumenical. It's a move to work together as the people of God to serve the world that God loves, to be independent, but to have more possibilities of working together. So I think in this present context, as we know some of the challenges facing the church, it is more important for churches to work together where we find common goals and common values. The retiring interim president or general secretary of the World Council of Churches wrote an article recently about ecumenism. And what he says is that ecumenism is not really about a shared or common creed or a shared or common liturgy or a shared or common ecclesiology, but rather it's the opportunity for those who are different to be able to walk together in fellowship, right? So that's an important goal of ecumenism, for us who may be different in certain ways to walk together in koinonia, in fellowship. And that's what I think what we might be able to do here is that while we retain our differences, our shared ecumenical space may help us to walk together in fellowship on those matters in which we find commonality and common values and goals. We're better as a church when we're in fellowship with one another. That's biblical. This is the hope for outcome of our move. So that's the metaphor, to imagine where we've been in the context in which 50 Winford was built, and to imagine where we are going and what story, what context does it present for us, right? Structure serves story. Structure serves story. Old structures don't serve new stories all that well. So we believe that we have these stories, which we heard yesterday, of hope and possibility. My question would be, what are the structures that we would need to serve those stories best? And what I mean by structures are many things, right? Could refer to things like polity. Do we need to have annual general assemblies? Like, I know we love being here, we do. But going forward, do we need to meet every year like this, or can we do things differently? Could we have other gatherings on years when we don't have assemblies? What kind of structures would serve us best? Our polity, our court systems, how we do things. It's really, I don't want to strictly define that by saying anything too definite. So if you're happy in your table groups, fine. If you think, I'd like to meet with some other people, even better. The people that are in the back, get to a table group. And I want you to, again, spend 10 minutes in prayer. We're at 4:20. We'll spend 10 minutes in prayer to about 4:30, thereabouts. And then we'd like to spend the next 25 minutes talking about what kind of structures could you envision that would help us to best support the kind of stories that we want to be telling about ourselves. And then what would you like to see as the next steps to this conversation? Again, we're not committing ourselves to anything definitive at this point, but we'd like to get your feedback. Please have somebody take notes, and please get to a table. Please start praying. Thank you. Looking for the moderator. I'm looking for the moderator. Just don't stand. So again, please bring your notes up here if you have them. If you need to email them, please email them to Terry Lee Hamilton at thamilton@presbyterian.ca. Thank you all very much for participating in this conversation. We look forward to receiving all of your feedback, and I'm sure it'll be very helpful as the Assembly Council continues this conversation. We're going to watch, following up on this, we're going to watch the second of our good news videos up here, please. The second of our good news videos, and this one Roberto. You're upstaging the good news video.
I apologize.
I mean, you can't bring a cat.
I didn't. He just walked in.
How are we going to get cuter than a cat?
Oh, me, but you know.
I'm going to sort of push Victor aside for a sec. There is a story about the cat. The cat does belong here. The cat is the cat of the university, and it just wanders all over the place. But do be careful because you never know where it's going to be. I mentioned it to the staff going, I wasn't sure how people would feel. And I do know that there's one person who is severely allergic to it, but the cat belongs here. And they say it will show up in exams and they'll just feel the anxiety of people calm down. It has shown up at convocation across the stage. So, hey, it wants to be at the General Assembly.
It's not the story. That is not the story I was told. I was told that that cat escaped from the experimental disease laboratory. Can we watch the second of our good news videos?
Hi, I'm Peter Coots from St. Andrew's Church in Calgary, and our congregation is helping to co-host a powwow in our immediate neighborhood in 2024. And we're here to tell the story about where that idea came from and what we're planning to do.
Our idea for the powwow came out of a meeting in Kairos, an overarching Christian group here in Calgary that wanted to know if a church would be willing to do a project for Lent, which led to a powwow in 2019. By the end of supper, we were all mixed and talking to each other. That's when we knew we had achieved the idea of breaking down barriers.
We walked in there. It was tangible, the excitement that we felt. There were people there of all ages. We were welcomed. We participated in an incredible day and just felt like we were extended family. And that's what this is all about.
So growing out of that experience, we're deciding to co-host a powwow in our own immediate neighborhood. We know that there are approximately 600 Indigenous people that lives in our immediate neighborhoods of Haysboro and Kingsland. And we're partnering primarily with the Kingsland Community Association in providing that, as well as with the Calgary Indigenous Friendship Center, downtown Calgary. And the three of us are beginning to put shape to the powwow. And we're also being supported by the social worker that serves Kingsland, and as well as a junior high that is in the neighborhood as well. And so what is helping us to do this is not just the support of these organizations, but a growing number of volunteers from our own congregation, from the community, and from a local AA group that is going to help make this all happen. And this is all the result of us working together. And we're quite excited about what the possibility will be in us connecting with the Indigenous folk that live in our region, but also those specifically that live in our neighborhoods, and that we can learn from them and perhaps even create some new relationships with them for going forward.
Moderator, before I finish, and I know you want to bless us and adjourn us, I just need to make one more announcement, which is that the minutes of the General Assembly, the first 4 Sederunts of the General Assembly are now ready, and they will be posted on PCBiz. They'll be posted on PCBiz. They'll also be posted on the Presbyterian Church website. We need you to go and check the minutes when you have time. And if you find any errors like spelling mistakes or other errors that you think, I think I need to point those out, please let us know, either the clerks or Terry Lee or at the General Assembly office, and we'll correct them. They may still go through a couple of more fine-tuning revisions, but they are up, and so we invite you to check them. Thank you.
Can we stand and pray? Heavenly Father, we come before you. Heavenly Father, we come before you in the Lord Jesus Christ, in the power of the Holy Spirit. We give you thanks for this day that we have been given and the work that you've given us. We pray that there will be fruits of our work will be resounding into the future. We pray for the hope that we have talked about this afternoon, hope for the future of our church, hope for the future of this earth, for humanity, for peace, for love, all those beautiful things that you are teaching us through the church and through your word. We pray for all the people who are suffering, who are going through things like Israel, Palestine, and all the troubled places in this world. We pray for the First Nations and the people who are going through so many things that it is hard to understand how people can continue going. We pray for the youth of the church and the special time I shared this afternoon with the youth around that table. Bless them richly. For the ministers and leaders and the commissioners and all who are here, we ask your blessing. May they go out and enjoy the evening and have a good rest this evening. We ask these things in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen. The meeting is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning in this room. Have a good rest.